Thank you again for joining us. Again, my name is Daniel Pageant. I'm the Waterways Program Chief for MassDEP. Several DEP staff present as well. This is a public information session, not a hearing. The department has posted a notice of grant opportunity on Combis. We've also posted this notice of grant opportunity on our website. There's been various efforts to get the word out. Thank you for having 32. There's 32 people here. There will be an invitation to submit proposals posted on Combis soon. We'll talk about the date in a moment. Presently, this is an opportunity, and we have the opportunity, because we've not posted the request for proposals yet, we have the opportunity to engage in this conversation. And we will respond to questions here. We'll provide some information here. We'll respond to questions. And we were responding to inquiries up until the day that we post this request for proposals on Combis. Once we post that on Combis, all questions and answers will be handled in a more formal way. So this is an opportunity to can have a little bit of give and take discussion. Okay. Next slide, please. Quick agenda. I will be giving you some background information on the grant opportunity, where it came from, a little bit about why we're here today. And then Ben Hanna will take over and will provide details on the opportunity, details on the procedures, etc. Repeating again, Ben Hanna, legal and policy advisor for the department. Sylvia Agadello-Style, regional planner for Waterways. Allison Colton from EP's Office General Counsel, and Nicola Porter, Environmental Justice Coordinator. We also have in the room Christine Hopp, who's the Assistant Director for the Waterways Program. A little background. This grant opportunity is funded through individual Chapter 91 licenses that have combined monies through the department's efforts into the Water Transportation Expendable Trust. The trust evolved out of a number of escrow accounts that were required by individual Chapter 91 licenses that required water transportation elements. The contributions were required in part to provide a means for watershed activation for these projects, these licensed projects, and secondly, to mitigate in part transportation impact related to those licensed projects. The monies were collected under the department's authority to regulate Chapter 91 through waterways licensing. This whole thing started, the Water Transportation Policy and Water Transportation Trust had its origin in the 2000 South Boston Municipal Harbor Plan. That plan required the collection of fees for certain projects to support water transportation within that planning area, and was later expanded. Since about 2002, the department has issued on the order of 15 different waterways licenses that all collect required contribution of these fees. Well, those monies have been spent in the past. There's been a bit of a lull, and the department is trying to get these funds out, doing what they were intended to do, promoting water transportation, supporting water transportation, etc. Each of those licenses contains specific conditions that provided a bit of geographic context or more specific use for these funds. As we go through the program today, and as we go through awarding these monies to recipients, those monies will still be used for the stipulated purposes in those licenses. We're not changing any of those licenses. We're not amending them, etc. The monies will be used for the purposes that were stipulated. Fortunately, they were broadly stated, and that's how we'll be awarding money. We'll discuss a little bit more in a moment about what the eligibility for these grants are. As I mentioned earlier, during the procurement process, there will be an opportunity to submit written comments, written questions, etc., and the department will respond in writing. As required by state procurement rules, the questions and the answers will be available to all, and again, that will be through Combos. So I'm going to turn the virtual lectern over to Ben Hanna, who's going to walk through some more of the details.
Great. Thanks, Daniel. So like you said, my name is Ben Hanna. I'm a legal and policy advisor at DEP. I worked to put together this grant opportunity over the last several months, or more than several months, I suppose, with help from our lawyers and OGC and the waterways program. So I'm really excited to be sort of finally presenting it out to the public and getting this started. So just to go over some of the key eligibility components or aspects of the grant. So starting with the eligible applicants. Eligible applicants for this grant are governmental, quasi-governmental, or nonprofit entities. Matches are not required, but are strongly encouraged and preferred. So applicants are encouraged to, eligible applicants from that, governmental, quasi-governmental, or nonprofit entities are encouraged to identify other known sources of funding, whether it's or in-kind, partnerships, in-kind matches, in order to, leverage this grant funding. So this grant, let's talk about eligible projects now. Grant aims to fund projects that support, promote, or enhance water transportation in Boston Harbor. The focus of the grant is supporting water transportation, moving people from one place to another in Boston Harbor. So on this slide, I've given a few examples that they are just examples that this is not the complete universe, but examples of eligible projects are new or expanded ferry service that enhances access to water transportation on the harbor, the provision of discounted tickets for water transportation services, the provision of discounted berthing for public water transit operators, new or improved signage informing the public about the availability of water transportation. That would have to be beyond any required signage that's already required under the Chapter 91 license, but anything beyond that, it could be an eligible project. The grant could also be used for the purchase of water transportation vessels or other related equipment, or the maintenance, improvement, or construction of dock infrastructure. And then the other aspect of eligibility is what Daniel described a little bit a second ago, and that is that most of this funding, not all, which I'll mention in a minute, but most of the funding is site specific. So in order to achieve the Chapter 91 goal of mitigating transportation impacts for a specific area, projects receiving funding through this grant program must support water transportation at the site that is the source of the funding. And we'll, in a minute, we'll get to how much each site has contributed. The sites that are the source of funding for this grant program are Van Pier, Pier 4 in the seaport, the Harborview condominiums in the Navy Yard in Charlestown, and then 226 Causeway Street, which is Lovejoy Wharf is the water, the nexus to the harbor there. And then as I mentioned, there's a small portion of funding within this grant is not site-specific, and it's dedicated to supporting cultural or educational activities that utilizing water transportation on Boston Harbor. I'll explain that more in a minute. And so just to put a finer point on it, an eligible project may support water transportation at multiple locations, other than the funding site, the site that one of the 4 sites I just mentioned, as long as one of those sites, is benefited by the project. And the obvious example here is a ferry service that makes multiple stops. As long as one of those stops is at a funding site, it's supporting water transportation at that site, then it stops elsewhere are still it would all be eligible. And to give a few examples, try to draw some contrast about what would not be eligible. So projects or activities along the Boston Harbor waterfront that are not related to water transportation. So for example, improvements to a waterfront playground or a park would not be eligible. The grant is also not for purely recreational projects, activities, or programming. So just for an example, like a kayak or paddleboarding tours, some activity that would sort of boost that type of tourism would not be eligible. And then making infrastructure improvements at one of the Boston Harbor Islands. This is just an example because, that's an example of one that there's no nexus to one of the funding sites, and it wouldn't, it wouldn't likely would not be eligible for that reason. Similarly, building an infrastructure at, the Long Wharf, for example, if it was, adding signage at Long Wharf would likely not be eligible because it doesn't have a nexus to one of those funding sites. But that again, we just wanted to provide a few examples to try to help our contrast and show what is eligible. Okay, so here is this slide shows the available funding by site. Again, these 4 sites. Fan Pier is the largest contributor to the funding available at this time, and that's 1.2 million. Pier 4 in the Seaport has up to $600,000 available under this grant. The Harbor View in the Navy Yard up to $260,000 is available. And 226 Causeway or Lovejoy Wharf up to $200,000 is available. And then up to $250,000 is available for proposals that support cultural or educational activities utilizing water transportation on Boston Harbor. And as on the application, that materials that will be released next week, it'll provide more detail about this, but applicants should specify which sites or site will benefit from their proposal. I mean, that'll probably be clear by the nature of the proposal, but obviously to make it as clear as possible. Okay, more logistical items or administrative items. The grant funding may be used for proposed, existing, or completed projects, so long as the activities for which the applicant seeks funding occurred no earlier than January 1, 2024. All work funded by this grant must be completed on or before December 31, 2026. And grant awards will be dispersed on a reimbursement basis. That means grantees will submit documentation of expenses and be reimbursed. Exceptions are possible if an awardee can demonstrate that it would be unable to implement its proposed project on a reimbursement basis. In that case, the awardee would have to provide sufficient financial documentation to support its request to receive upfront funding. And then, yeah, I wanted to end with the calendar before we open it up to discussion. The full RFR and with an application cover sheet will be released next week on the 21st. There will be a period of to submit written questions to DEP, and that deadline is November 6th. And DEP will post answers. We'll post written answers to the questions on our website or through Combis. We'll specify that in the materials next week by November 22nd. And the deadline for grant applications is December 13th. And then we'll hope to make awards in a few months after that. Okay, that's the end of the presentation. I know we covered a lot, but we want to open it up for questions and comments. I will stop sharing here.
To direct your attention to the chat, I posted the DEP website for this opportunity. And that website has various pieces of information, discusses much of what we discussed here. And this is where the recording of this public information session will be posted. There'll also be a link here to the Combis RFP.
I see some hands, so I can sort of call on people by in the order I see the hand. So Dave Perry from MBTA, you can take yourself off mute, or go ahead.
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Dave Perry, Director of Ferry Operations for the MBTA. Thanks for putting this together. Really appreciate the information. Really appreciate the opportunity. Can you talk a little bit more about the geographic boundaries of the sites? Like everybody, I think, kind of basically understands what Pier 4 is. That's very well defined. But like in particular, the Fan Pier. Does Fan Pier in your parlance extend all the way from like Northern Ave all the way around to essentially Pier 4? And then the same question would go to that condo up in Charlestown.
Want me to take that, Daniel?
Go right ahead.
So it's a great question. It's one we knew you'd ask, and the Seaport Fan Pier, those two are, yeah, like you said, those are a little bit easier. We don't have a black and white answer to that. I think it would depend on the nature of the project. So, for example, signage or infrastructure, land-based infrastructure that helps get people to water transportation. Certainly is not bound. It would not need to be right on the waterfront. In terms of building a dock, something in the water that's sort of not already there, that you can make that case to us in your application, but that would obviously be a different can of worms. The Charlestown one is a good, it's another good question because we acknowledge that that's not where MBTA is located at the moment. For just to address you, David, directly, but that it's not where the larger dock infrastructure in the Navy Yard is located. But, you know, that license that contributed that money, that licensee, the condition was to sort of improve water transportation at that project site, which is more or less defined in that area of sort of in the north of part of the Navy Yard, or northeastern. So I
So
don't, we don't have
what
a
I
great
think
answer.
I hear you saying is that a project could apply and say, listen, I'm not directly on their doorstep, but those people could walk to this proposed grand terminal, you know, or whatever we're going to do, and therefore that's the nexus to the location element of it.
I think, yes. I mean, I think what the takeaway should be, there's going to be some judgment calls there, yeah. But yes, I mean, that's, yeah, I'll leave it at that.
David, let me jump in there for a second. You know, Fan Pier is a not a small geographic area from 91 perspective. I'm not certain that I don't think that any of these funds came from the courthouse project. We'd have to think about whether the monies could be used at that location, right at the foot of the Northern Avenue Bridge. But just around the corner where, let's call it Fan Pier proper starts, all of that, all the way to Pier 4, fairly certain would fall within the catchment area of this.
Understood. Thanks.
I don't think we got any money out of the federal government on the courthouse one.
Rich?
Yeah.
Thanks,
Go ahead.
Daniel, and thanks to DEP on moving this forward and the opportunity for the city to weigh in on this process. I'm Rich McGinnis with the City of Boston's Planning Department. I just had a question about the vetting process for sort of grant applicants and just coordination with our transportation department, MassDEP and MBTA. What's great about water transportation is that it can tie people together from areas where there are sort of transit deserts or not optimal connections on land. And just wondering how, you know, these applications will be sort of coordinated with the land-based transportation needs versus opportunities for water-based transportation. Thank you.
Thanks, Rich. We will definitely definitely be considering how the two mesh, and to the extent that that someone, you know, that a grant application is relying on city services or programs that are funded through BPDA or BTD for that matter. We'll be considering how they mesh there. I can expect, can predict some consultation with your office and perhaps others at the city. So.
Great, thank you.
All right, Alex Franzo, you're next.
Thank you, Ben. Alex DeFranco from Pierce Park Sailing Center in East Boston. We're interested in the cultural and educational component of the grant and wondering if some of our young adult staff that are interested in pursuing kind of like a workforce development opportunity for their merchant mariner credential so that they could work on the water transportation options that exist on Boston Harbor, if that would fall within the scope.
Can you tell me a little bit? So tell me more. I guess I don't quite understand what you mean.
Yeah, to be a captain on a ferry, you need a merchant mariner credential, making that workforce local people that live in the city we train teens and young adult staff, and that's a definite workforce development pathway that exists, and a lot of people are interested in jobs that can be difficult to fill. And would that part of the grant that's dedicated to education and cultural resources potentially be used for workforce development for teens and young adults that want to become a captain to work on a ferry?
We need to think about that a little bit, Alex. The portion of that is, I guess, land-based educational, probably not. But the part about piloting vessels, it sounds like there's some overlap here, especially if they would. I guess depends on who they're, how are they actually facilitating water transportation? How are they providing that? I get the reference to workforce development in this, pilot in the pipeline kind of thing, right? I get that. I think we'd have to think a little bit about that and think about how that fits or not.
Okay, thank you.
Kelly Sherman, do you want to? Great.
Thank you. Thank you for hosting this. This has been really helpful. My name is Kelly Sherman. I'm the manager of waterfront design at Boston Harbor now. I use she, her pronouns. You sort of maybe answered it somewhat in Alex's question, but is it possible to apply for funding for something that's not a physical asset? Like, for example, if we were to do it like a digital sort of like signage or like wayfinding, would that be considered okay under this, or does it have to be physical infrastructure?
Well, so the easy answer is no, it doesn't have to be physical infrastructure, because it could be something like just, discounted tickets, knocking the price off of tickets, or knocking the price of berthing, for public water transit operators. Yeah, I mean, and it, if under the ambit of sort of signage, for example, just to use your example, I would say we did, digital based sort of signage is possible. It could be eligible. Again, it would sort of, as these questions, all the questions sort of made clear, and maybe the presentation, there is going to be some, we don't want to stray too far from, we need to, stay true to the license conditions that underlie it. And there's absolutely some discretion that we can, because what it looks like to support water transportation doesn't, could be digital map for sure. But yeah, I guess I can't just give you a clear yes or no, but that I don't see, based on what you said, I wouldn't rule it out. I think it could be eligible.
Kelly, one thing that we would do is we would look to see whether or not an apparent deficiency in signage that may already fall to the licensee to provide wayfinding signage, even though it'd be really great to let's get it out there, get that additional signage installed. If it's physical signage, for instance, maybe that means a letter from the department. You're missing your signage. And secondly, there are other licenses that require websites, video displays, etc., in their buildings to provide information about water transportation, schedules, maps, etc. So if we would try to look to the licensees first to provide those requirements, or to at least check to see if they're required otherwise. But it's not something we're going to dismiss out of hand. We're going to see whether or not, see how it fits. and see whether it's just a gap. If you've identified, your group has just identified a gap where there is not a requirement in someone's license, then that may very well be a good fit.
Thank you.
Courtney?
Good afternoon. Courtney from the Seaport Ferry. I have two questions. The first is, will you award more than one grant per location?
We're open to that. We're gonna look at, we'd like to have lots to choose from. And if two grants at the same location provide different, two different opportunities, two different improvements to facilitating water transportation, then we'd look at both.
Excellent. And then my other question is, will you provide assistance with the dock owners if we come up with something like shelters? Because obviously we're touching these locations, but we don't own them. So what would that look like?
We can certainly connect folks with the licensees. If you're going to propose something on a particular landing on a particular dock, I would strongly encourage you to connect with the licensee or operator prior to submitting the grant application, so that we see this proposal in front of us, and it may be an incredible idea, but if the licensee isn't on board, then that it will be difficult to pull off.
Okay, thank you.
Jamie hasn't spoken up yet, so let's go to Jamie Fay.
Thank you, Daniel. Jamie Fay with Fort Point Associates. I've worked with a number of the licensees who've contributed some of these funds. And I would just want to thank you for finally putting this program together. It's been a long time in the coming, and some of these funds have been sitting either in escrow or account of DEP for 15 years or more. So it's great that you're moving forward with this. And while I'm saying that, I'm also encouraging you to think that you might want to give a little bit more time to expending these funds than the end of 26, just because you're not going to make your award. Presumably, if things move along well, it's going to be sometime early in 25, and there may be programs or activities that would benefit from multi-year type approach. If somebody's trying to get a service off the ground, sometimes it takes a while. So anyway, I just think leave yourself open to the possibility of a little bit more time than the end of 26. Second point, you have seemed to excluded any private parties from responding to your RFP, and I'm sure you have good reasons for that. I'm just wondering if you could maybe expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, that is just the way the trust, the Boston Harbor Expendable Trust, that's just a term of the trust that the trust funds may be expended only, only to governmental, quasi-governmental, or nonprofit entities. On your first point, absolutely, more time could be, again, the current deadline of December 31, 2026 is dictated by the trust, which expires in early 2027. So we just gave ourselves a couple extra months, but we have options of, DEP has extended the trust or renewed it several times, and we could certainly do that again. It's just at the moment, as we sit today, it needs to be December 31, 2026. But yeah, that can be changed if needed.
Jamie, the trust I think the trust was created in 2019, combining numerous escrow accounts. It's been renewed a couple of times, and it'll, unless something dramatic happens, it will be extended again, but I can't, we don't have the authority to extend that. That comes from a different program, different office, administration and finance, I guess. So, we need to avoid committing funds to something that violates the trust.
Sure,
that's why.
I get it.
So-
Okay, that's helpful. So
Also, just to add, private entities, my name's Courtney Starling, I'm grant administrator for MassDEP. The reason why we don't do or offer grants to private entities is because it's a violation of the anti-aid amendment and state law. So we can only actually give to public organizations. And so that, just a minor point, we don't actually issue grants to any private organizations. We do welcome partnerships though. So if a private organization did want to link up with an eligible entity, that is always an option. Just wanted to clarify that we can't do it. So it's not just an issue of the trust, but it's a, you know, it's a bigger issue. And so, but like I said, partnerships are always welcome.
yeah, so I get your point, I guess. The original restriction, the original license contributions were not so restricted, just so you know, right? So the money that was required to be spent on these activities per the Chapter 91 license was not restricted to public entities. So
once, however, we become the grant, you know, the giver of the funds, though, we ourselves as a public entity, as the state, are subject to certain restrictions. And so while the fund has a variety of ways to operate, given that these funds are being operated via a grant program, it's subject to the restrictions of that program. It's because of how, if you want to think of it as, you know, like the wash, it's because of the entity that it's moving through and how it's being offered, that it's governed in accordance with both state laws as well as the best management practices and procurement manual. So there's a whole host of regulations.
I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I'll just make the observation, A, that the original source of the funds was not restricted that way. B, all the water transportation services in the harbor are being provided by private entities. They're maybe contracted through a public entity. So that might be an option for a particular situation, that you could find a way to contract with a private entity to make something happen. As was mentioned, maybe, you know, something on Van Pier, like a shelter or something like that. It's maybe better affected through.
I'm given to understand that there were some assistance agreements offered previously that were direct investments, which again, because this is being offered as a grant and not via some of the other avenues, this has some specific restrictions to it. So this is simply because it's the specific vehicle being used for these funds with the spirit of offering them competitively.
Yeah, I'm just making the point that this is shifting the original terms of the licenses, but that's fine. I understand your thinking on that. And are there no funds from East Boston, Daniel? I thought there was 100,000 from Carlton Wharf that was in this.
No, there are funds from East Boston. This 2.5 million and plus 10,000. That's 2,510,000. It does not represent the entirety of the trust. Some of those license conditions that you referred to, Jamie, are even thornier than the ones we're trying to get out the door through this grant. And so we're going to have to expend, you know, the East Boston funds, for example. We just need more work to figure out how to spend them in a fair way.
Okay, understood. So this is just the beginning. It's not the end.
It is. Jamie, you expressed your that you were glad this money was starting to get out the door again. So are we. There's been a lot of interest in the department to get this thing pulled together and out the door. So
thank you.
I'd like to acknowledge Courtney Starling's contributions to this discussion. Thank you, Courtney. She's our star grant administrator. So, finding Barrington waterways. Don't tell Weldon. Good, Perry.
Yeah, it might be a dumb question or already covered or way in the weeds, but how would you expect or want applications to be submitted from the same agency for multiple different ideas? Would that be separate application? Number one, is that acceptable? And number two, would it be separate applications, or how would you want to see that structured?
Courtney Starling, do you have a suggestion?
There are a few ways to do this strategically, and if there's anything that I say that is contrary to the RFR, I apologize in terms of applications. You can look at it, sort of more than one way. It is when people submit more than one application, they tend to submit it with different partners. If you want to submit an application with more than one activity, that is also, you're kind of weighing the odds a little bit about, which one's most likely to be funded. However, if you price them separately in your price proposal, as the grant is evaluated, the activities can be evaluated separately. And so as long as you're fairly clear in how you structure your application, it's a little bit your choice. Though if you have different partners for different activities, those should be separate applications.
We have a pause and someone else is figuring out how they're going to phrase their question. I want to do two things. One, I want to read aloud the URL for the website in case there's anyone who is unable to read the chat. https://www.mass.gov/info-details/Boston-harbor-water-grant. And that is Boston Harbor Water Transportation Fund Grant. And I suspect if you type just that phrase into Google, you'll find it just the way I did a few minutes ago. So it's on mass.gov, Boston Harbor Water Transportation Fund Grant. And what was the second thing? Second thing was we will be taking questions by email up until the day that we post this on Combis. Questions can be sent to dep.waterways@mass.gov, and we will be answering questions up until it gets posted on Combis. So please don't wait till 5 minutes before it gets posted on Combis, because then, well, we'd have to roll that. We would roll that into a publicly asked and answered question. See?
Hi, so I was wondering if this is going to be something you think that's going to happen every year, and if so, if you can apply every year for the same project, or if there's some kind of restriction on that.
As Ben mentioned, this is not all the money we have socked away in the Water Transportation Fund. So if your program is 1 year or 2 years or something in length, then you can apply again. I mean, that application for the second year would have to, I guess, fit in with the first. We would not dismiss out of hand an application for a continuation, obviously, continuously successful program. In fact, continuously successful program would probably be looked on favorably.
And I would just remind you that this can be applied retroactively to this January 1 of this year, 2024. So if you're in the middle of a and you want to middle of something and you want to, try to apply and get what already happened funded and then or reimbursed and get the next year's activity funded, that would be possible. But I want to mention, this is not necessarily a recurring grant. I mean, we're going to see what we can get out the door this time. And if we have, like I said to Jamie a second ago, I mean, the other remaining funds in the trust have license conditions that make it very hard to compile them into a grant program like this. So, I don't want anyone to bank on sort of this being sort of an annual thing. We are very motivated to get the money out of our hands and into the public, doing good on the harbor. That's and so we hope to, if we can spend all 2,510,000 this time around, we're going to, and we get the projects that are eligible, and to do that, we might very well do that, and then there wouldn't be a next year for this. So for this grant program. Go ahead, Dave.
That was my question. You answered it. Is it your intent to award all the money that you can right now?
Well, we have no reason not to, and it's just going to be see what we get for but we're not, we wouldn't intentionally hold anything back if
It's not, if I may make a cultural reference, it's not going to be like the Price is Right and spend it down to zero by grabbing stuff that we might not otherwise have funded. We're going to evaluate the proposals on their merits. Do they comport well with the goals of the grant and the licenses, and then award to promising proposals. We won't spend it down to zero. We won't we won't spend it down to zero because we have to. We want to use the money appropriately.
And similarly to that, would you consider partial awards, like if you get, if you can't fund everybody everything, you give some people some portions of their application?
I think we would reserve the right to do that. Yes.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
So we're almost at the 1 o'clock hour.
I see one more hand. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay.
Jessica.
Jessica.
Thank you for hosting this. I'm Jessica Garcia with Boston Harbor Now. How many of the cultural and educational grants do you anticipate funding?
I think I'll take that, and Ben, you can correct me if I think I got it wrong. We're gonna evaluate the proposals as they come in, not in the order they came in, but we'll evaluate the proposals that we get. And if we're able to fund one, we will. If we're able to fund 2 or 3, and those are worthwhile ventures and meet the score well in our evaluation, then we'll fund one.
Excellent, thank you.
We don't have, there are some brackets around this, right? There are buckets of money. There are specific areas. There are license conditions we need, we need to meet. But we're going to evaluate what we get, and if they meet the criteria, and we've got the money, and they look worthwhile, and they look like they're going to be successful, and we will fund them to be simply. What I was going to mention a moment ago is if reasonable accommodations, the department will make reasonable accommodations to obtain any of the grant related materials in an alternate form. be that language translation, large text, what have you. And I'm certain I'm cutting that short by listing just those two. But the department would be happy to provide any reasonable accommodations that might be requested for how to access the materials we prepared, the materials to go up on combis, et cetera. So, and if someone wishes to make a reasonable accommodation, a request, or whether they're here today or not, and they hear about it, the request should come to dep.waterways@mass.gov, and we'll be happy to do what we can to accommodate the request. Again, the website, it's at mass.gov. Search Boston Harbor Water Transportation Fund Grant. Is there anything else? Ben, did I miss anything? Did we miss anything together collectively?
No, I just would thank everyone again for,
We do, I'm sorry to interrupt. We do need to vocalize the question that was asked and also the question in the chat, please.
oh, thanks, Sylvie.
Get there. Okay. Will this presentation, thank you, Sylvie. Will this presentation be made available to us after the session? The answer is yes. The presentation will be posted along with the video of this session on the website I've mentioned a few times. And that's October 21st. Combine posting is October 21st, team?
So you may ask questions up until October 21st before the formal Combis application goes up to the DEP Waterways email. And then subsequently, there will be another question and answer period posted, and you'll use the Combis system to do that. Either way, we will post both the questions we received today and between now and the 21st on Combis with the answers, as well as the Combis formal question and answers.
Thank you. I think those are the only questions in the chat.
There was also the Wada Hapa question that came in that needs to be vocalized and just answered, even though we've answered it, about partnering with a TMA.
Oh, that question came in prior to the session by email. That's right. We can't find that question.
I can summarize the gist of.
Thank you.
It was a question just from a private for-profit, entity that is standing up a water taxi service, and the question was about that entity's eligibility, and the short answer is on its own as a for-profit entity is not eligible for this grant funding, but as we've discussed today, through partnerships with eligible entities, or and by partnerships I mean sort of the creative matches, in-kind donations, in-kind or matching contributions of funds, whatever it might be. That's how for-profit entities may end up sort of contributing or participating, but in no circumstance can they be the applicant or the recipient of the funds. So what we encourage everyone to put together creative proposals.
Thanks for your time. Anything else? Thank you all for attending. I'm glad to see nearly 20 people from outside state government. Well, more than that. So thank you again.